Hey guys, this is Marq McQueeny here with the Mix Minus podcast. This is the best of episodes number 1 to 10, where I'll walk through some of the best clips from the first 10 episodes. We're going to start off right at the beginning, where else, episode 1, where I kind of set the mission statement of the show. I'm just going to jump right in. Podcasts really make me think back to my days. I'm only 31, but back in my teens when I was in punk bands and emo bands and even to a certain extent screamo and more heavy music. But there was a certain ethic to being in a band, you know, where you're practicing, you're finding equipment, you're playing with your friends, you're finding records you really love. You're trying to integrate those records into the way you play. You can't wait for new records, not just because you want to hear it, but because you want to see what are the ways that I can hear something I really love and then try to play it myself and do my own interpretation of it. And it really made me think of the fact that podcasting is like today's garage band, not the application for Mac computers or iPads, not that garage band, but the original garage band. People actually playing in a garage together, putting songs together. It moved more in my time from garages really to the basements. It really is that same idea. And over the last week and a half, as I've tried to prepare for this podcast, because I've really gotten hit by the podcast bug over the last year and a half in general, listening to great podcasts like Joe Rogan, The Nerdist, some WTF with Mark Maron, Bill Simmons, all the way up to the public radio ones like On the Media or, of course, This American Life. And it's this storytelling and it's this expression, this way of getting across the things that are important to you, having a voice in the world. You know, and as I spent over a week researching the process of podcasting, the ins and outs, learning from the trials and tribulations of others, it really made me think of this band idea. Because that's really what being a band is. It's getting together with friends and like-minded individuals and trying to create a product, something that you're proud of, not necessarily that's going to be commercially viable, but it's getting something across that is very important to you. And it, just the process of doing it makes you feel good. Forget the end, just the means, that whole progression of putting parts together and songs together. And that's something that really hits you about podcasting, is that you can just sit here in a basement in the middle of anywhere USA, anywhere in the world, well, most places in the world, and you can turn on a mixing board, put together a couple $100 if you can do it, turn that mixing board on, press record, get across the things you feel, and then all of a sudden you can send it out to the world. Now, how many people are listening to it? Probably not that many at first, but if you can find good guests, if you can find a good viewpoint, hopefully you get enough people who care where you kind of bring back that community virtually of people sharing ideas, back to that idea of being in a band. The next episode, I enlisted my friends and coworkers, Marq Romero and Frank Alvarez. One is a designer and the other is a back-end developer. And we talked all about the release of iOS 7, which was at the time Apple's biggest and most recent software release. And it was a big one. So it was a lot of fun stuff to talk about, chock full of interesting Android versus iOS, all the phones on the market, and how it re-envisioned the entire platform. So this clip kind of jumps into the new piece of iOS 7, which was iTunes Music, which was a big part.
The thing that I think we'll just use that to move to iTunes Radio. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to utilize it, but
no, not yet.
I've been very impressed.
The music,
the music app with the radio station.
My initial thought when I started using it was, where are all the buttons? So I had to get used to the fact that buttons buttons don't look like buttons anymore. They look like hyperlinks. But because it's a touch device, it's not like you're scrolling over the hyperlink and you could see the underline, that little indicator that says, hey, you could click on here. So that was the one thing I had to kind of get used to. Once I realized that all of these, quote-unquote buttons or hyperlinks are of the same color, then I knew exactly what I needed to do. They're all this kind of magenta, which, why magenta? Why do they pick this color?
That kind of took me by surprise as well. Like red is usually like a
and when
a warning type of a.
It's like a pinkish magenta or something.
It is weird, yeah.
And then when I saw that, I was like, well, is there a way to change this? Is there a way to change it across the entire OS?
I actually find those buttons in particular, the ones that are at the top left and top right, almost of every app, I think they went from being too overboard to being too underassuming.
Mm-hmm.
They're very much, in some of the apps, they almost bleed into it, and they're just little words. It's very...
Yeah, I did see some reviews, and a lot of people have complaints about the back button. It's no longer a back button. It is now, one of these links. And it typically has the arrow that points back, and it'll have in a word, it'll have where you're going back to. But it's inconsistent. So here I have my music app, right? Whatever you call it, iTunes Music. I'm looking at this. I clicked on now playing,
mm-hmm.
and there on the top left corner, there's an arrow that points to the left. Now, I know that that's to go back to where I came from, but there's no text here.
But maybe that's that thing we were talking about, where they're at this point.
This point that
where you're going to go back to.
Yeah.
I only know because I've done it already. I've played with it. Yeah.
Or that it's very similar to what you would experience on devices you've had, through your.
Yeah, from the beginning, the tablet has always been. One of those has always had one of those interfaces that you can discover your way into anything. If you don't know how to do something, you can very easily just start touching on different things, dragging, whatever, and then you start discovering what it is that you need to do is actually quite easy. You could just drag this over here, or whatever it is that you want to do. And that's how I felt when I first started this app. I felt like I needed to discover all these different sections. I started dragging from the top. I'm like, okay, what does this do? That's part of the OS. What does that do? And after my initial whoa, how do I do things? It's kind of easy. It is kind of easy, and I like the design.
It's a very appealing design. It reminds me a lot of Rdio, which as a streaming radio service I have found to have the best looking interface. It's just very clean. I always like white as backgrounds of things and
mm-hmm.
a more white-centric.
I've always been a big fan of using white space as part of your design. There's a certain way to use white space so that it's not kind of overbearing, like, okay, you have no content on here, it's all white.
Yeah.
Or, things are cluttered. There's no delineation between this category and that category, this item, that item.
One of the things I really liked with the iTunes Radio, and this could be with other services, I just never really noticed this, but when you're listening to a station you create, you can actually you can go to an info button, and then you can choose this radio station to play the hits of all the bands that will come up, so the most known songs,
mm-hmm.
or on the other side you can discover, and so those are songs that maybe go deeper into the catalog of bands. And then there's a continuum where you can actually drag the little thing across,
right.
to pick where on that where along that gamut you want it to be. And I think that's really cool with this, because iTunes, I read today, I don't know if it's 100% true, but they have 26 million tracks at their disposal in this iTunes Radio. So that's the library they're pulling from that you have the ability to listen to.
Yeah.
Pandora has 1 million songs. So maybe they're just doing the hits, but 1 million songs.
Apple has a lot of pull when it comes to content. I mean, they've been doing this in iTunes forever. So they're in bed with all of the big and small labels. So I'm not surprised that they have so many, so much access to so many different songs and albums.
And word is they've been very fair to artists in terms of the royalties they're paying on this. So that's kind of a nice.
How does that work?
I think it's on I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's on
like
a pay per use.
If I pay $129 here for
no,
this,
that's for you to buy it from iTunes
play.
Store. You're buying that song.
I'm buying it. So what are the royalties distributed to the artist?
No, the artists actually get paid, I believe, based on just you listening in the free radio app.
Kind of like CMA?
Well, sort of like Pandora, the way that works, or others. So you get paid based on when your songs are listened to. And obviously they get paid when you end up buying it.
Next up was the first time my wife Melany came on the show, and we talked all about how we met, and it was an interesting way to meet through Match.com and internet dating. So this clip talks about the first time we met and the story of mixed up Starbucks and how we almost didn't meet.
Why don't you talk about how it actually happened when we were going to meet, which I think was a week before the NBA season was going to start in 2007.
Yes. Well, I remember we had planned to meet up at a coffee shop. And I don't think I ever exchanged, like I know some people that have dated online or online daters who exchanged phone numbers and things like that before they actually met the person. But I never did that. I just emailed back and forth. And then we set up a time to meet. We were planning to, because you're very logistical. You looked at the map and took my town and your town and tried to find something in the middle. And you brought up a town which I was very familiar with. And you said to meet up at the Starbucks in Denville, New Jersey. And I remember I really had no interest on the day of the date to even go on a date with you. I just had no interest. I didn't care to do it. I thought I was done with this whole online dating thing. And my very good friend from grad school had just come up for a weekend to spend time with my mom and I. And I was telling her how much I really didn't want to go when we were driving her back to JFK Airport. And she said, "Oh, just try it. You never know. I think, it could work out." She's a very positive person. And so I dropped her off at the airport. I came home. I think my grandmother and my aunt were up for whatever reason. And I went out into the living room to tell them I was going on my date. And my grandmother's response to what I was wearing was, "You're wearing that?" And it's true. I had on, I think, a turtleneck and a sweatshirt over the turtleneck and jeans. Not very fashionable. And so then I think we were supposed to meet at 5, if I recall.
Possibly. I don't have a very good memory.
No.
Usually, but I think that sounds about right.
And I drove to the Starbucks, and I was sitting in the Starbucks, and I was the only person, and you never showed up. And I thought, did this person really stand me up? And I thought, no. So I called my brother, who was working in the town of Denville at the time, and I said, "Isn't there another Starbucks around?" And he goes, "Yeah, I think there is." And then I called my mother, because he wasn't very much help. And my mother said, "Yes, there's one further down on Route 10. So I asked the Starbucks barista, yes, if they could call over to the other Starbucks for me. So they dialed the number. I got on their phone, and I had asked their barista in the other location if there was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy sitting there by himself. And they said yes. And I said, could I talk to him? So they put you on the phone, and I said, I'm at a different Starbucks. And then, we laughed, and I said, I'll come to you, because I was more familiar with the area and I knew how to get there. And this was before I had a GPS in my car or anything like that. And my mom, or a smartphone for that reason. And my mom helped me get from my location to yours exactly.
And isn't it funny that the first time we meet, who the person would have been who helped you get there?
Right. My dad loved all of those map programs. He lived for me to call and say, I'm lost, help me get out of this, or what's a better way to go?
Yeah, and I think I was on the other end at the Starbucks, because I don't think we realized that we obviously didn't realize there were more than one in the town there, but I went to the one that I saw, and I'm kind of sitting there going, oh, what's going on here? And then randomly I think I heard the woman say, are you Matt?
Yes, because I had said, can you ask him if his name is Matt?
And I said, I am. And she said, Melanie's on the phone for you. And I said, okay, this is interesting. This is like a weird television show.
Mm-hmm.
And I picked it up and you said, I'll come right over to you. And I was kind of like, okay, I can't explain this, but
right.
You showed up. I guess I didn't pay for a drink, but
No, you didn't. You already had a drink when I showed up.
Yeah.
You were the first date, by the way, where you did not pay.
Well,
actually, I shouldn't say that. Maybe the first date with the guy that worked for Jim Cramer possibly split the bill with me. I don't remember.
Well, he worked for Cramer. He wants to save us money.
I guess so.
But we ended up meeting on that day, and I think had a very nice time.
I was surprised how much you asked me about my father and the whole process of him being sick.
I was very interested in that. I'm very big in family, but I think I came away from the experience just knowing right away that this was a person I was looking to move forward with.
Mm-hmm.
Next up was my mom, Amoroso, who has a really heart-wrenching story about being adopted. She was adopted at birth, and much of her life was kind of put towards trying to figure out who her original mother was. Not that she was unhappy growing up in the house she did, but she had a real need and a yearning to find that family. And this clip kind of jumps into the early part of figuring out kind of where she came from.
You said a lot of this was sealed in terms of who your parents were.
It was completely. I had no idea, and in fact, my mother never told me she had any inkling of where I came from. She never told me that, and I did ask it by the time I was a teenager. I mean, I do think there are certain stages of development, probably especially for girls who've been adopted. As you are developing mentally and psychologically, you wonder, who am I? I am not just the product of my adoptive parents. I'm the product of a secret and a mystery. So and my mother and my father, especially my mother, because it was her cousin, my mother knew more than she ever told me.
Of course, yeah.
So by the time I was in my early 20s, I began to shake the bushes to find out where I came from.
And in the days without the internet, how did you do that?
Yeah, the internet has changed everything. Back in those days, first of all, I think I connected with an organized group of birth parents, mostly birth mothers. And a birth mother from that group went to the original records in the town where I was born for the day that I was born and found my original birth certificate with my original name and my birth mother's name. And I was about 25, I think, and she called me up on the phone. I was living in Pennsylvania, and she said, I have your birth mother and I have your birth name. And I was excited, shocked. I said, I was a reporter. So I said, excuse me, wait until I get my notepad and my pen. And she said to me, your birth name was Annette McNeil and your mother's name was Anne McNeil. And that was the first time I knew I was Irish.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was that just like a movie, like a light bulb hit when that happened? Or not a light bulb hit, but a strike of lightning?
Yeah, right. It was shocking and strange and great. But, and of course, it takes you a while to internalize and digest that. And from there, I wanted to know who she was, where she was. And because I was a reporter, Dad had friends who covered the Division of Motor Vehicles, and one guy, and he called up to the Division of Motor Vehicles in Rhode Island. I knew that my mother had been from Rhode Island, and found her, located her. And I should point out, if I can just backtrack a little, before I found out, I had gone through this period of time when it was clear to me that I had to find out. The first thing that let me know my mind was worrying about this, I saw a movie about reincarnation. And the protagonist was going over a bridge, and she was looking at the stanchions on the bridge, and she was having flashbacks that she had seen this bridge before. And I walked out of that movie terribly shocked, because it so resonated with me that I had been here before, or I had been another person in this life. I had been somebody else. So there was that. And then I was going to the city to do interviews to New York City. And I remember going through Grand Central Terminal, and I was just watching people go past. And I tended to do this whenever I was in crowds, looking for people who looked like me, wondering, is that my mother? Is that my mother? Is that my mother? And knowing my mother could have been anyone. And I could have passed her on the street and I wouldn't know who she was. She was my mother. So those were the elements that pushed me to do this. A lot of times nowadays, people who want birth certificates to remain sealed say, oh, it's idle curiosity. And the priest who arranged my adoption said to me, I thought this was a good adoption until I found out you went searching, and you went searching out of idle curiosity. There was nothing idle about my curiosity. I was driven.
Amazing stuff. I would compel anybody who wants to hear the full interview with my mom to go back and find that in the archives, because it really was quite an interview, and I'm not going to give myself the credit. It was her story. I just turned the microphones on and let her go. Next up is an episode which was recorded with a friend of mine, Randy Chieco, another coworker. Randy came up to my house for the Breaking Bad finale last September, or I wouldn't say last September, who knows when you're listening to this, but in September of 2013. And with him there about a half hour early, we did an opening to the episode, which was our thoughts on what would happen in the finale of Breaking Bad. And then we came right back after Breaking Bad with our hot thoughts and our hot takes, where we thought the episode went. And we have obviously both loved it. So here's a little clip from that. I believe it's the pre-part.
We're here with Randy Chieco, Matt McQueeny, Mixed Minus Podcast. We're going to talk a little Breaking Bad. We're going to try to do something which at least we think is innovative. I don't know if it actually is. We're going to do 15 or 20 minutes before the episode is about to start. It's about a half hour away. And then we're going to come right back down here to the podcast lair and do 15 minutes on what actually happens. I think all are predicting how it will end. Randy, what do you think about how it won't end?
Well, that's really hard to say, because, if Gilligan has showed us anything, everything is on the table. And so it's really hard to predict. I think what won't happen is it's not going to go in any cliche way. Like I don't think at the end Walt's going to die or end up in jail. I think it's going to be something completely different. I hate to say it, but maybe along the lines of Dexter. In the sense that maybe everyone thought he was going to end up in jail or whatever, but he ends up being like a lumberjack. So that I could see possibly something unexpected like that.
I hated that ending, by the way.
As did a lot of people.
Although now that I'm thinking about it, the lumberjack thing would be a fantastic ending for the Heisenberg. Imagine if you just see him show up on the same lumberjack yard.
I know it. Then they'd have to have there'd be a big debate who stole that idea from who, and then Dexter versus Heisenberg. Whoa.
Well, the good thing is, and I don't want to get too deep into Dexter, because I think probably do one in a couple days that really brings this to fruition on what happened across these different series. But for this one, I think we know going into this one that, I'm literally so excited. You say I'm hyperbolic, but this is probably the best dramatic television show in television history. It's up there. It's probably top 3 or top 5. And, I think the last time I remember one that was this anticipated was probably Sopranos, right?
Probably The Sopranos, and that was a big shocker the way that ended. It was, the famous cut off and wonder what happened in the next frame kind of ending. Either that or possibly Lost, which, a lot of people either loved or hated. Half the people thought it was a cop-out, and the other half loved it. I loved it, but that's a whole other story for a whole other podcast.
Well, I think we can probably rest assured that this episode will not end with everyone alive.
Well, I wouldn't be so sure. Maybe if that's what you expect, possibly it could be, something else could happen. I mean, that would be horrendous after everything Walter White's family has been through. If they end up being murdered, I would not be happy to see that, but I guess that's certainly within the realm of possibilities.
I recorded a quick audio essay on my thoughts on streaming television, and while it's almost a year old, there's still a lot that holds true. And in this clip, I jump into where I believe streaming content is going on the television. So not hardware. You can listen to the episode if you want to hear that in full, but this jumps into the content part. We can get great amounts of content through streaming platforms, but it is usually archived, typically about a season behind the live show. Or you can get Hulu Plus or Aereo, which basically give you access to live or up-to-date broadcast television. To get premium content live, you typically need a cable subscription login a la HBO Go or Watch ESPN. Netflix has been on the forefront of creating so far very good original content, whether we're talking House of Cards, Orange is the New Black, and there's many in the works where they're greenlighting money for big series out there. Is that enough for a user to hang their hat on, though, and leave the other networks? Unbundling, cord cutting, or getting rid of cable television will not happen until the market creates the environment for that change. With 100+ million households with multi-channel TV in America and just somewhere in the range of 4 to 5 million households with broadband connections and no multi-channel TV, there is no need for providers like HBO or Primetime Sports to offer a la carte services and spurn cable's captive hundreds of millions of people. Should the two numbers begin to converge markedly, again, we're talking about that 100+ million households with multi-channel TV and the 4 to 5 million households with no multi-channel TV but money and broadband connections, I'm sure there would be no qualms on the part of providers to make their channels available on an a la carte basis. There is also the question of, does buying a la carte offer that much more of a savings once you add it all up? Would the prices per channel go up once they are on the open market because of the fact that now 100 million households would no longer be subsidizing them? Case in point, an article in The Atlantic from July said that 100 million households paying ESPN's $6 a month right now would be $30 a month for the expected 20 million fans who actually watch it and would pay for it. The same article says that AMC would be $10 a month if the 2 to 3 million households who watch it bought it in an a la carte fashion. Would broadband prices go up because of the increased data usage? Because you're now streaming all the time, you're using immense amounts of data. I know with my triple play, I have a plan which allows me somewhere in the realm of 150 gigs per month. I might not come up against that because of the fact that I'm able to offload some of my watching into cable, other ways to watch it. But if I were solely streaming, would I be using up data at a huge clip? An interesting thing, too, with that is my cable provider says that they only track your gigs that you're using between, I believe, 5 p.m. and 1 a.m. So anything you're doing outside of that window does not count against your cap. But if all of a sudden you're no longer buying cable from them, do they turn on the window of watching how many gigs you're using to be all day instead of those primetime hours? Also, would you have to pay a broadband premium because most of the broadband providers up to this point had been your previous cable TV provider through triple plays? Will they try to look to make up for lost TV revenue through internet? None of this is necessarily the end consumer's problem, but sometimes when you unspool yarn, you don't know when it's going to stop. This does not mean that ESPN's deal is fair at the high amount of money that they pay to get major sports. No one said that they had to pay exorbitant fees for the right to show all of these games of the most exciting leagues and teams, and it is not our job as consumers to cry over ESPN's inability to make up that cost if cable were unbundled. To threaten that superfans would have to pay $30 a month for ESPN, as that Atlantic article stated, almost 4 times as much as I pay per month for Netflix, is a pretty hollow threat.
Should cable unbundle, I do not see that many people paying that $30 a month for ESPN anyway. And in that case, ESPN would be the only one truly left with the obligation to pay for the contracts they created. Feels like the financial crisis and subprime mortgages on the ball fields and pitches. Sports is really one of the last exclusives of cable television. If I did not like sports, I would be rid of cable TV. But there is always an obstacle to trying to get sports how you like it and how you are used to it without cable TV. 1, for ESPN, you need a cable subscription to see their digital offering. 2, you can purchase the sports packages through Apple TV or Roku, but it is quite expensive, and you can only see teams outside your markets live and inside your markets on a time delay. That doesn't really work when you can only see, in my case, as a Mets fan or a Nets fan, when you can see their games only at about 10:30 at night. I'm asleep by then, so I'm not even going to be able to see the games live, so that doesn't work for me. And once the playoffs start, you either don't have access to those games or they are archived on demand when it is over. Someone could truly disrupt this model. Google was recently in discussions, who knows how real they were, to buy NFL Sunday Ticket. That is like the golden chalice of sports. To have that system and on Sundays be able to showcase all of the games, that is primetime content. Or how about if someone like Netflix decided, instead of splashing $100 million on an original program like House of Cards, they could buy the rights to sports program, either on a game of the week basis or through the rights to a major team with a lot of fans who are spread out across the country. Can you imagine if Netflix bought the rights to the Boston Red Sox? I don't know how real that is, but where there's money, there's a way. Turner Sports bought baseball rights for 8 years for $300 million a year. So that kind of gives you a feel for where the money is. And if you're paying $100 million on House of Cards, what about $300 million for sports? As a Mets fan, I wouldn't mind Netflix bidding on that. Another question. Can Apple or any of the other players, emerging or traditional, reinvent the cable box as it exists now? If they could, here's what it might look like. A beautiful device that you can purchase at a place like the Apple Store, Best Buy, Target, or from your cable provider that is compatible with your home's cable feed. The modern device could consume that feed and in a graphically pleasing way present your cable options as one with all of the other options available, from Netflix to Amazon Instant, Hulu Plus to iTunes, and any new entrants who can innovate within this new paradigm. There could be integration with what friends are watching, related shows to those you like or are watching, or a trending interface. The second screen experience could be integrated into the first screen. And who knows, perhaps if a device can do this, the company or companies behind it can get the upper hand as a middleman between the consumer and the cable company. Maybe that could eventually lead to a cord cutter option that we haven't even thought about. As for cable subscriptions, I'd love a tiered plan that acts almost like a fantasy sports auction, where you can set a budget and then pick, plug, and play among options. Say you want to pay $25 a month. Maybe premium channels like HBO or Showtime are $10 each. Maybe sports channels are $8 each. AMC or FX is $5 apiece. And broadcast channels like CBS, NBC, or ABC are $2. You can pick your channels that add up to that budget, or go to a higher budget if you need to have more. This would be great if you could plug and play as needed, but if it had to be on a monthly basis, that would be fine too. Or what if Google could get the rights to something like NFL Sunday Ticket on top of this, and somehow could break through or pay its way to overall cable-like TV the way Apple appears to be trying to do? Google could even roll out its super speed Wi-Fi across the country, the way they have been piloting in select communities currently. Couple this with a TV play, they could build share by subsidizing their users' ability to watch their programming over broadband. This would be a nice carrot to using their service. You would think they certainly have the means to make a bold move like this. Netflix recently signed a deal where their services are integrated into Britain's Virgin Media, their first integration ever with a major pay TV company. Many take this to mean that Netflix is sleeping with the enemy. I don't agree. I think Netflix is doing best for its continued growth by plugging into a potential new audience and finding a new or old distribution mechanism. With TV distributors seeing Netflix as quote-unquote another network and less as competition, I think it plays perfectly into Netflix's strategy. Grow and evolve with the world as it is, with the ability to pivot to where it is going, and do it while not making your competition and primary content providers scared that you are the catalyst to their demise. Kind of reminds me of the Toyota Prius. I know I recently compared Breaking Bad's Walter White to a Prius, but perhaps because I drive one it is always top of mind. But what I mean by this comparison is that right now if you buy an electric car, there are, like cord cutting, considerable barriers: price, range of charge, unavailability of charging station, electric bills. Sure, you might be happy to have the newest and greatest, greenest, though that's debatable, and most futuristic, but this at a potentially marked cost. I bought a Prius because it gives me, in my opinion, all of those benefits, but most importantly, plugs in nicely to the way the world actually exists. I get 550 miles to a tank, and I can stop at any gas station like a conventional automobile. Does it mean I think the future of the electric car will not come to fruition, or that I won't get an electric car when the world I live in is set up for it? No. But at this time and for my foreseeable future, the Prius, in my estimation, is the most practical step on the way. Same with Netflix. They are simply using gasoline or the current distribution mechanisms to get to where they are going, but they are primed to nimbly alter course if those mechanisms start to fall. Plus, at that point, it won't matter what those mechanisms, aka traditional TV distributors, think.
Marq Romero, who you'll remember from the earlier iOS 7 episode, came on the show to talk about Google Glass. Mark was chosen as a beta tester for Google Glass, and he even let me borrow them for a weekend. Interesting concept. There was a lot of limitations I found with them, and a lot of times that can have to do with being a beta tester because there's just not the full applications in place when you don't have large amounts of consumers out there using it. But right here, Mark tells us a little bit about what it was like to find out that he won the chance to be a Willy Wonka, a.k.a. Google Glass tester. He got the ticket. And then I remember you were really excited because you found out at work. How exactly did you find out? It was kind of like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, right?
Yeah, it was like I got the golden ticket, man. Yeah, I got a notification and from Google Plus, and my heart was just pounding. And I think we were in a meeting at the time, and my heart was just pounding. I just wanted to go check it real quick. So I found out, and I tried to contact my wife first through Google Chat, which was a bad idea because she didn't get it. So since I didn't hear from her, I just posted on Facebook that I won the golden ticket, and all these people liked it and commented on it, and she thought she was the last one to know about it, so she was kind of upset about that.
Now, from the point that you were informed to when you went to pick it up, how long of a period of time was that? Was that months or weeks?
I think I found out in May, and then you had to select, they had available dates, and I picked July 1st.
Nice. And then just kind of walk through what that day was like, how it went. I guess it was in New York City, right?
Yeah, it was in New York City. It was really cool. They took over for one of the top floors in Chelsea Market, and they basically transformed it into what seemed like their version of what the Apple Store, their version of the Apple Store, I guess, where they had kiosks set up, and it was very clean, very minimal. They had a kiosk with all the different colors of glass and you got to try each one on, see which one you liked, and you got to spend one-on-one time with one of their glass gurus. That's what they called them, glass guru, glass guide, actually. So he was very cool, very nice, and it was a very personable and intimate experience. It was very cool.
And the setup was pretty seamless?
Yeah, it seemed like it, except for one thing when I was trying to activate the internet, to connect it to the internet. That kind of took me a while, but I got the hang of it now.
And so pretty much when you got it, you were just sort of let loose in New York City?
Yeah. Since right after I left, I didn't take it off for the whole entire day. I went to like a dinner with my friends that night, and I was wearing it. I was pretty much inseparable with it. I wore it all the time, pretty much.
And we all saw kind of the Google Glass. They had that video where it made it look pretty amazing.
Oh yeah, yeah.
What kind of from that first day? Because we'll get to my thoughts because you actually let me borrow it this previous weekend. But on the first day, what were kind of the positives you saw right away, and then what were some of the limitations?
Positives were just being able to take pictures, hands-free, taking videos, hands-free, and then just being able to not look at my phone as much for certain things. Like if I wanted to find out what the weather was, I could just ask it. If I wanted to find like a nearby, restaurant or gas station, whatever, I could just ask it.
I met Kevin Pelton back when I was a beat writer for the New Jersey Nets official website. He was the beat writer for the Seattle Supersonics website. Obviously, the Supersonics have moved on to Oklahoma City at this point. But Kevin, since then, has kind of ascended to be a real player in the basketball sabermetrics game. So really using, math and data to find everything out about every kind of player, past and present, you can think of in the NBA. And he parlayed that into actually being an analyst at ESPN. So he writes as an ESPN insider. In this clip, he talks about how his career came to be and the happenstance and serendipity and synchronicity of it all. I want to kind of
phase into this idea of media now, especially sports media, but media in general, is much more entrepreneurial now and much more kind of democratized. We have the web. We have these platforms that allow anybody who has a voice and a great, frame of reference of content. You can get out there and you can really find a niche, and then ultimately people can actually find great positions. And one of the neat stories, and one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on here, was to kind of hear that story, because it probably gives a lot of people growing up a good I'll use the word role model. Sorry, Charles Barkley, but a good model of every single thing you do. Always kind of follow your passion, because every single thing you do will lead ultimately to something that potentially could be professional, or if you like it enough, it'll be something that gives you fulfillment in your personal life. And obviously, I think for you, kind of the mix of all the things you did were very, if I could use the term, Gladwellian. So if you could kind of talk, I know I've seen you kind of talk about it in different places, but it really is kind of an inspirational thing. If you can kind of talk about all the different ways from a kid who, I think I read you didn't play basketball after 6th grade.
Yep.
How you kind of led to this ESPN insider point. It's really an interesting story.
Yeah, it's inspirational, but it's also kind of like people ask me, for advice from time to time, like how do I do it? And I'm like, I'm the absolute worst person to ask, because it was a complete, just total fluke. I always was very interested in basketball despite being terrible at playing it, and then always had a certain interest in math and kind of quantifying things. And I looked at some basketball statistics even when I was a little kid. Used to copy down the per 48 minute stats off of I like Fleer and Skybox cards, because they were the ones that had those on the back, so I could rank guys in terms of their points per 48 minutes and rebounds per 48 minutes and stuff like that. But I never really thought about writing or analyzing basketball as a career until I got into college. And at that point had started reading Rob Nyer on ESPN, and got into Baseball Prospectus. And at the same time, I started reading more about basketball on the internet, obviously, and the forerunner of hoopsworld.com was looking for a Sonics columnist because they hadn't had that position filled. And I was like, you know what, let me give this a shot. And Steve Kyler, who's still running Hoopsworld today, picked me out of the however many applicants they had, and just kind of ran with it and found it was really something that I enjoyed a great deal and maybe had a little aptitude for. So that kind of led to, I started my own Sonics website, soniccentral.com. That was my sophomore year of college, and also started to experiment with doing some of my own metrics and writing about the league as a whole from an analytical standpoint online, kind of at the same time. And the Sonics site I had the next year too. I had the opportunity to become an intern for the Sonics website when that was the only content was done by interns. And again, just really right place, right time. Not only even to see that application, my cousin happened to spot it in the UW student newspaper, the Daily. I otherwise never would have known about it or applied. So there's some great serendipity there. And happened to come right at the time that the web was becoming a much bigger deal for them. And after I graduated college, they turned it into a full-time position for me. So I've kind of had these parallel tracks where one was more the traditional writing, primarily about the Sonics, and then also at the same time doing the analysis stuff. Started writing for 82games.com at one point when they were a very popular website, and that helped me get a great deal of exposure doing that. And so the last season of the Sonics, again, very fortunate, is the timing that, I wasn't going to be following the team to Oklahoma City, so I knew I wasn't going to keep doing that. At the very same time was when Baseball Prospectus decided to start up a basketball site, and they happened to get my name and hire me as their NBA writer when they initially weren't even planning to do any NBA coverage. And so that turned into, it was like one column a week the first year while I was still covering the Sonics, but then turned into pretty much a full-time thing the year after that. And that was sort of the big break where I was able to really be able to do this for a much larger audience, if still a niche audience. They also had a partnership with Insider. That's how I first got involved with Insider, and they became aware of my work. And that sort of eventually led to this opportunity when, fortunately, John Hollinger got hired by the Memphis Grizzlies.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing that even the fact that you've gotten to stay in your hometown.
Yeah, which was always a big thing for me. So, it was kind of a deal breaker, obviously, with the Sonics moving, but other positions, and it's worked out really well that I've been able to do that. And, the nice thing about this job is so much of it is watching games on TV, so you don't necessarily even need to be in NBA City at this point, although fortunately Portland is close enough that I make it down there from time to time.
Next up is my dad, Jim McQueeny, and we talked all about his life, which was a real, I think I'm going to say Horatio Alger story, but I don't know if that's completely true. It feels right. But he was very poor, growing up in Oradell, New Jersey, and he became a major journalist, White House bureau chief, chief of staff to a U.S. senator, and ultimately a successful businessman. And this clip kind of has him explaining how the heck he got that shot. Where did this all start for somebody who, again, grew up poor, had just a simple high school degree?
You were obviously quite poor growing up in a time when Bergen County had that, and you didn't really graduate. Well, you did graduate high school, but didn't really do much with college. How did you get your first opportunity in real media?
Well, in a very, very funny way. My mother, to put us through Catholic school, 5 of us, she had to cook at the rectory of the parish and at the brothers' home and at the convent. So they were all near each other on the premises, on the grounds. But in exchange for cooking those meals and being the cook, we got our tuition taken care of. So I used to walk to pick my mother up after dark in the winter in particular, and I'd be there to walk her home. We didn't have a car. Again, as you mentioned, growing up on welfare, father dead when I was in high school. And so I used to sit with the priests while they were finishing up their meals. The rectory was the last dinner my mother would make. And I'd get into all these discussions with the priest at the end on things I read, because, again, I was a voracious reader. My mother was a voracious reader. And that went on for many years, actually, and I became very friendly, and I would duel with the priests over things that you were supposed to be reading by going to college and things like that, which I didn't. Couldn't afford it. Had to stay home as well with my brothers to basically earn money to support them. And then the Monsignor of the parish, the guy in charge, said, "So, Jimmy, you want to be a writer? You want to be a good writer?" And I said, "What kind of writer do you want to be?" And I said, "Well, I'd like to be a rich writer." And everybody laughed. And he said, "No, what kind of writer?" And I said, "Well, maybe a writer like a Hemingway, an action type of writer, something like that, And he goes, "Sure, but even a guy like Hemingway started somewhere shorter, smaller, and more reasonable." He goes, like even Hemingway started at a newspaper, which I did not know at the time. And he said, yeah, Hemingway started as a reporter for the Kansas City Star, and that's where he honed his talents to be a writer. Maybe you should do the same, and you'll be a Hemingway someday, I'm sure. And then I said, well, in my conceited way that only a 19 or 20-year-old could say, well, yeah, maybe I can spend some time at the New York Times tuning up before I go to become a writer. And he goes, sure, the New York Times would be good to have you, Jimmy. And I went, yeah, and maybe the Daily News. I like the Daily. Oh, sure, the Daily News too, Jim. They'd be good to have you. And then there's a pause, and he goes, and maybe you send an application to the Hudson Dispatch. And I went, the what, Monsignor? He goes, the Hudson Dispatch. It's a paper in Union City, New Jersey. And look, it's not in New York, but from Union City, you can see New York across the Hudson River. So it's like being in New York. And I said, sure, I'll send them a resume too. Why not? Well, of course, I sent all these resumes out, and I never heard a word ever again from anything else except the Hudson Dispatch. I get a note to come in to see for an interview the publisher. The publisher's name was McMahon, another Irish guy. The Monsignor was an Irish guy, Tom Curry. And I went in to see McMahon on an interview. The interview lasted like 5 minutes. I got ushered into this cathedral-like room. He was the publisher, and it's very rare that a publisher ever would interview a novice reporter, ever. I came to realize that later in years. But I go in there, and he's yelling on the phone at some Hudson County pal, real mad, telling him where to go on this type of thing and get the classified ads into this paper. I don't want to hear it. And he had his back to me, and he slammed the phone down with a curse. He looked at me. He goes, "What do you want?" And I said, I felt like the cowardly lion before the Wizard of Oz. I went, I'm here for the job interview. And then he goes, "Oh, right." And the only question he asked me, "Sit down. Tell me what you read." That's all he said. And then I started, because I read everything, loved to read, knew everything. I went on, and I was like a driveling idiot. And then after about 10 minutes, he goes, enough. He says, we'll give you a call if an opening comes up. I think, oh, I failed in the interview. I walk out. And Monsignor asked, well, how'd the interview go? And I said, I don't know. All he did was he asked me how I read, what I read. And I told him, and I think he got bored of it, and I think I blew the interview. So Monsignor Curry said, you never know. So I get a call a few weeks later to come in. I'm hired. I'm ecstatic. I see the Monsignor. I'm still picking my mother up at that time from the rectory. I see the Monsignor. I said, Monsignor, the Dispatch hired me. And he goes, well, doesn't God work in mysterious ways, my son? And I said, yeah, maybe, but maybe they recognize my talent too, Monsignor. And he goes, of course. So it goes along like that. I'm working there for a month, and then I get called in on a mistake. I made many in the beginning, and that's how you become a reporter, making mistakes, learning more from them, adjusting. But I made a doozy of one. I get called in by the editor who I hadn't even spoken to in the month and a half I had been there laboring at the paper. I get called in. His name was Francis Oliver, Mr. Oliver, they called him. I walk in, knees shaking, again, cowardly lion before the Wizard of Oz. I walk in. I say, yes, Mr. Oliver. And he goes to tell me the mistake I made and what wasn't I thinking. And then he makes a comment, and he goes, listen, we expect more out of Tom Curry's boys when they come here. And I looked and I realized, oh my God, Tom Curry got me this job. And then I went literally that night, go to pick up my mother again. I see Monsignor Curry, and I said, Monsignor, you got me that job. And then he said, well, maybe I got you the job, but you're going to make something of yourself with that job. That I can't help you with. That you have to do yourself. But you know what? You are going to make me proud in what you do. As I went on my career and stuff, Monsignor Curry passed away sometime before that. But I thought to myself, the anonymity of giving and that kind of thing, how nice it was to be the beneficiary of that. Maybe I, in hindsight, truly wasn't that good to be hired even by the Hudson Dispatch, which wasn't exactly a reputable paper. People in the county, it's no longer around for 20 years now, but people in Hudson County used to call the paper the Hudson Disgrace. And there were a lot of reasons for it, but I'm happy for the reasons they gave me that made me a better reporter, that let me go on after that through a succession of things that led me all the way to the White House and television in New York.
It's funny in life, the people you meet through certain channels. My wife Melany and I were looking for a wedding photographer during the time of our wedding, and we came across just an absolutely great photojournalistic photographer, and that was exactly what we were looking for. And we we found him through seeing pictures of another wedding that he shot, and it was just a great kind of just a great look on how you do this. And so we found him, we met him, and he ended up being an awesome guy. He's in his 30s, really cool, hung out with us. And so I had him on because I thought, wow, what a cool story, because not only is he a photographer, but the guy started out his career, kind of had a tiger mom, Asian, and he started out his career as a hedge fund guy because that was what you had to do. He used that money to become a photographer, what he really wanted to do. And then through being a photographer, it's allowed him to travel and go on social vacations. And he just, every time you look on his Facebook feed, he's somewhere else amazing, working with elephants, somehow in the middle of the, Thailand revolution years ago. He's always somewhere, Iceland, wherever he goes. So this clip jumps into talking with this photographer, Joseph Lin, about why he goes on these social vacations and kind of what he looks to get out of them.
All right. Well, in the final couple of minutes here, I wanted to have you talk a little bit about these. You had talked in the beginning, as we did the introduction, about these social vacations, the check boxes you've been able to take off of the bucket list. We've known you now for almost 3 or 4 years.
Almost 4 years now.
4 years now. And you've gone to some pretty cool places. What in the let's say top 3 that you've done in the 4 years we've known you, because you've probably done 15, if not more. But what are kind of the top ones, especially on the social good front? Because it seems like you have a real kind of tinge of that in what you're doing.
Yeah, right when I got into the whole photography thing, I actually started doing a lot of volunteer work. I initially started doing a lot of volunteer work in Vietnam, in Saigon, where a lot of the children are still being affected by Agent Orange, from the war, and it's still in the herbs, it's still in the soil, and it tends to get into the ultimate induction of food. And then it's still an ongoing thing. And then we're working with a program. Sorry, there's fire trucks everywhere.
It's all right.
New York. We've been working with a program in Ecuador, where we essentially cater to the poor demographic there, the children that aren't really given a chance. Because a lot of times in Ecuador, unless you have money and you can send your kids to private school / Catholic school, there aren't a lot of good public options. Or public options at all. So this program that I work with in Ecuador, they essentially raise money, raise awareness, educate the kids, put them in school, but also put them in a situation where they can succeed in school. So they educate them, they'll buy them books and everything ahead of time. They don't just kind of throw them into the fire. Because even if they get into school, if they don't enjoy it, then what's the point, right? And generally speaking, if you're not well versed in your literature or your language, and you're not up to par with the rest of the students, you're going to get picked on, and it's just not going to be a very pleasant experience. So that's still an ongoing project. We do fundraisers every now and then for those guys. But as far as my travels,
we'll talk about the elephants.
You know what? I was working at a elephant camp for about a week and a half when I was in Thailand, and I loved it. Because they're so docile, they're huge. They're technically, if they wanted to, they could theoretically squish you within a second. But they're so gentle. They're just big. They're like big horses with extra long noses. That's how I kind of view them. And they're really playful. It's just sad to see, especially in countries like Thailand and everywhere else, where there's not a lot of free range for these animals anymore. They can't just go into the wild and just disappear, especially elephants, because everything has been either demolished for the sake of human living. I mean, outside of probably Africa, I would say probably 75% of the world has been civilized per se, or developed.
That's an interesting thought. Sure.
It's it's like even up here, you hear about black bears going into people's backyards and stuff like that. But
that's my house. That's my house, by the way. I got tons of bears. House? I'll send you some pictures.
but think about it this way: even a couple hundred years ago, there were no houses there, or it was their territory.
How about 20 years ago?
even 20 years ago?
Yeah, we have these bears, and where I grew up sort of still in the country, but it wasn't country like this. If you look on a Google map where I live, and then you pull back from my street, we are the exception. They're not. And it's pretty amazing. I've seen about 5 bears in my neighborhood since right before the summer this year, and you see them a lot. They go after the garbages, which are probably good for them because you can't, I would never do this, but you can't eat bear here because all they eat is garbage. So they're not good meat.
Yeah.
They're all filled with garbage.
They're all filled with plastics and...
But that was a shock. That was a shock seeing them. But yeah, like the other thing I thought was interesting, I think when you went there, wasn't it during like the revolution?
Oh yeah, that was during when they had the red shirt protest.
Yeah.
I flew in specifically for that. I flew in just to document everything that was going on in Thailand.
Did you really?
I looked for trouble.
What was that like?
That was intense. I remember going in and then automatically being on lockdown. Like flying in, because I flew in Emirates. So I flew from New York to Dubai and from Dubai to Bangkok. The flight from Dubai to Bangkok, it was a 747. But it had like 27 passengers.
Yeah, I saw that picture. That must have been the most eerie thing.
Yeah. And I was like, hey, so since there's nobody on the plane, because it was pretty much a 1-to-1 crew to passenger ratio. I was like, since nobody's on the plane, can I just go to first class? They're like, sorry, we can't. Company policy, we're not allowed to upgrade anybody. I'm like, there's nobody on the plane.
How about if I give you $100?
There was nobody on the plane, but anyway, so I ended up like just laying out 4 seats across. But that was creepy because once I got in there, the hotel I was supposed to stay at was shut down because it was like in downtown area. Then I went to the Khosan Road area, which a lot of backpackers are, and that was probably the only other place that I was able to find foreigners outside of downtown, which is at that point just completely blocked off because there was just military vehicles everywhere. There was bombs going off. Half of Bangkok was like smoking at that point. I was finally able to get in with a press pass because at that time I was also working for the United Nations.
Okay.
I got in with a press pass, and it was really weird to see the difference in technology they had. One side you had like the Thai military with their M16s and their tanks. On the other side, which are the red shirts, which are the I guess the blue collar demographic of Thailand. So if Thailand's a poor country, just imagine the poor version of that. So what they used as shields were just which is wood planks, like 1-inch wood planks with like a handle on them, and like a makeshift pipe from from a building of some sort. That was their weapons.
And you did this for fun.
I did this for fun. I did that, and then once that was over, I flew up to the north of Thailand and spent some time with elephants. So it was like I got one of the items. I mean, the checklist. I guess I got. Part of me also wants to be a war photographer. Parts of me just wants to like throw myself into the fire a bit. But there are a lot of politics with war photography. I've actually looked into this. You can't just release any photo that you want. Everything has to go through hierarchy to see which ones are, I guess, presentable to the press and to the rest of the world. And as a photographer, that's the last thing you want to hear. The last thing you want to hear is, you can't just show whatever photos you want to show.
Thanks so much for listening to the best of episodes number 1 to 10. It's been so much fun doing this, and just in this first 10 episodes, you can kind of see the varied grouping of people that we had on and stories, and it's kind of set the tenor for where I took it over, the dozens and hopefully moving into the future, hundreds of episodes I look to do. So appreciate the subscriptions, and I'd ask that you leave any kind of reviews you can on episodes. But iTunes, Stitcher, all the different podcast catchers. You can find them there. And MatthewMcQueeny.com, you can always find all the episodes and all the things I have going on, who we look to get on, and have a good day.